as ethical and environmental issues continue to pile up against the meat industry, would you eat a steak or burger if you knew the meat was grown in a laboratory? Well, this may soon be our reality. Cultivated meat, in theory, tastes the same as the real deal, but no cows or other animals are killed in the process. Last year, a restaurant in Singapore became the first in the world to serve cultivated chicken nuggets, sample dishes going for about 330 Rand each. Closer to home, South Africa's own Mogale Meat Company plans on producing its first tasting prototype of meat by the end of the year. We're now joined by Dr. Paul Bartels, the CEO of the Mogale Meat Company. Dr. Bartels, thank you so much for joining us. As I was reading this story, I had images of Star Trek, and they had those replicators that produced meat. Is this what you've managed to achieve in the lab? Star Trek-like replicators that make meat?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because NASA, for instance, is, of course, working on this. You know, they send people into space, and all they have is this dried food that they, add water to and then have to eat. And they found that a lot of the astronauts were actually losing weight by the time that they came back. They just didn't want to eat that meat. But back on Earth, if we consider what's happening to planet Earth, of course, we know that from a greenhouse gas point of view, that it's not good for the planet, because livestock produce at least between 15 and 18% of greenhouse gases. So that's one of the first really important and good reasons. And of course, the other is water use. So by growing meat in the lab, we must think of the fact that in actual fact, there's this massive potential in the body, in muscles. So there are precursor stem cells in muscles. So for instance, when you go and exercise, those precursors start multiplying tremendously, and then some of them will actually turn into muscle fiber. So what we're really doing is we're using this potential that is already in animals to produce the product that people actually want to eat.
Can meat grown in a lab really taste like the real deal, Doc?
Well, understand this. It is real meat fibers. So the same protein, the different cells that make up this protein are, of course, your muscle cells, and then, of course, fibroblasts and fat cells. So there's this mixture that is what you find in muscle, in meat. So it's there. It's the same. So people that have been asked, who have tasted it before, said, yes, this is muscle, this is meat. And the fact is that this kind of product can be produced, not so much to say the lab, because that doesn't sound good, but actually in more like microbreweries. So yes, it's actually not a lab. People, when they think of a lab, they think of these people, little petri dishes, etc. But in actual fact, already there's 3 or 4 pilot plants going up, a few in California, one in the Netherlands. And of course, this is going to a degree, disrupt. But what you're really doing is you're adding value to a person's animals, because yes, you can take a small sample, and it's a very small sample, and you can start growing this up in the bioreactor and then produce products, and a whole lot of novel products that can come out of it, including 3D printing, eventually a steak.
So in theory, it is meat because it's grown from the same cells and it becomes a muscle, which is the meat. But what about the other things that make meat meat? For example, the fat you get in Wagyu beef, for example. And what are the different varieties of meat that you can make?
Oh, that's very interesting, because that adds a huge amount of value. For instance, yes, we know Wagyu has got a higher percentage of fat. So, for instance, one can decide, if we look at an average of between 10 and 15% fat in a normal piece of beef, one can reduce that and so have, shall we say, healthier meat and actually healthier fats as well that is added to that. So that opens up a whole new scope up there of, shall we call it, novel foods which can be developed and where you can now provide meat to not only vegetarians, because by the way, the vegan society in America has approved this, so too has PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So in actual fact, clients are everyone, from your vegans all the way to meat eaters. Obviously for us, our big target is meat eaters because that is the majority of people out there. Because of our human population growth, and we're expecting to see at least another 1 billion people on the continent of Africa. And just think of the amount of crops that have to be planted that have to feed these cattle that go into feedlots. So usually around about 9 months, 10 months, cows that are grown out in the field are then put into feedlots. And in order to feed these animals in these massive feedlots, you need a lot of grain that needs to be planted, which means lots of land has to be chopped up. So here's a way, my background is wildlife conservation. So here I also saw this as a massive contribution in the future to the fact that we can, there will be less land and habitat chopped up, but yet still have essential amino acids, essential animal proteins for feeding our population.
Prof, very quickly, I've only got about 30 seconds left with you. First, how safe is it? And secondly, when it comes to some of the religious requirements of food, like is it halal, is it kosher, where does your meat fall?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So from a safety point of view, and I think you saw some of those photos that you brought up earlier on, the amount of testing that takes place, you can imagine you're not concentrating animals together like we know creates the possibility for pandemics. So there's lots of testing that takes place. So from a safety point of view, one can say that it should be a lot safer than your classical slaughter meat production. From the point of view of halal, there's discussions that are being held both in Europe, in the Americas, in the Far East on this, and it seems that there will be a way of making sure that this meat can be classified as halal going forward. So we think that there's discussions happening at the moment between different industry interest people, and we think that that will actually cover a lot of the religious issues around slaughter animals.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much for your time. I'm not sure if you've managed to convince everybody, but I'm sure you've convinced a few people that meat-free meat can be a reality. Dr. Paul Bartels, the CEO of the Mogale Meat Company, they say meat-free meat could be on its way to South Africa in just about a year's time. What's your take? Meat-free meat?
Have you tried that that meat-free meat that you get in the shops now that's made up of vegetables? Because that tastes pretty much like meat. Something what I didn't understand is how can this be vegan approved if the cells are initially from animals?
Oh yeah, that is one of the criticisms. But Dr. Bartels was saying it's a very, very small sample of cells that they take and they put in a bioreactor. So maybe that counts as a reason. There's also questions about how energy efficient it is, but it definitely does have its pros.
I think it's the way of the future. I think this is the way it's,
yeah.
This is how it's going to be.
As we go along, we'll have to, weigh the pros and the cons.
I'm willing to give it a go.
I don't know, man. I'm not sure. I'm undecided. I'll let you know.